Welcome to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave, where we are on a mission to answer 4 questions from the best leaders and leadership minds in the country. So we are here today with the very first episode of 2025, and we're pleased to have returning guest, Dr. Mark Smith. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, 2025. Welcome to the new year.
Welcome to the new year. Yes, we're not recording it in 2025, but by the time it airs and gets edited, yes, this will be the first full week of 2025. And so we wanted to jump into the new year and get some new perspectives from a returning guest. So we're real happy to have you and looking forward to the same 4 questions and a completely different interview. It's
great.
I laugh. I was talking to somebody the other day that I had interviewed, and they went back and watched 7, 8, not whatever, a bunch of episodes. And the guy was floored. It's like, I don't get it. It's the same 4 questions. There's not one single episode that's even close to each other. I'm like, that's, don't know what to tell you, man. I enjoy it. It's always different.
That's right.
So for those who didn't see the first one, or if you want to add some extra to your last one, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. Tell who you are, what you do, some of your background. Give us a scoop.
Yeah, so Mark Smith, I'm an organizational psychologist. So I work in my own company here, A Better Choice Hire. So last year I wrote a book about skills-based hiring and then, helping companies implement this type of thing. And when I say skills-based or skills-first hiring, hey, there you go. It's really not relying on education degrees or years of experience to do the bulk of the candidate screening. It's really looking at the candidates as individuals and trying to assess their skills and their competencies individually, and not just the assumption that, oh, he's got a bachelor's degree, therefore he's smart, or she's been in that role for 10 years in a different company, therefore she's highly competent. Those assumptions, I think, are largely misplaced, and sometimes it's I think the result of maybe lazy hiring or just a lack of understanding in the other ways that we can properly assess things.
I would agree 100%. It's funny that why I'm laughing about a couple of things that you mentioned, right? It's like, wow, they got a 4-year degree. They're smart. They're this or that or the other. Well,
right.
What was it? I'm going to butcher the reference, so pardon me. I think it was Sly Stallone in Tulsa Kings. He was talking about his driver. And he was talking about, did he go to school? Blah, blah, blah. And he was like, I want to get a 4-year degree. He said, 4-year degree just means that you can put your mind to something. It tells an employer that you can put your mind to something. They can give you certain tasks. You can do them, complete them, and see something through for 4 years to its course of entry. Maybe it's a measure of persistence, whatever. But it's like, that just shows that I can give you an assignment. You can actually do the assignment to my satisfaction, rinse and repeat for 4 years, right? So I was just laughing how he kind of put the 4-year degree thing, which, like I said, it's good or bad. It depends on, what kind of degree. Trust me, a degree in engineering, when you're trying to be an engineer, is a whole different ballgame than a degree in interdisciplinary basket weaving, right? I mean, it's just total different ballgame. But I was laughing about the 10 years experience too, because I'd mentioned on another podcast, back when I was in the fire department, I had this one guy that they were just back and forth, a couple of guys, a brand new guy that came in, rookie firefighter, and this old crusty old master firefighter. Funniest guy. He's like, I've been doing this for 30 years. And they're back and forth. And this guy had no filters, right? So, being kind of a smart aleck, he said, so he asked the guys like, well, do you have 30 years of experience, or do you have 1 year experience that you just rinsed and repeated for the last 29 years? I was like,
yeah.
I'm not discounting this stuff. He's seen a lot. He's done a lot. Same thing with the 10 years. But if you continue to learn and grow and develop over those 10 years, to a certain level of mastery, as you mentioned, versus I just look at the resume and it's lazy hiring. Wow, they've been there for 10 years. I'm assuming they've grown and developed and they've progressed every year over the 10 years. Or did they just learn what they learned out of school, had their new hire orientation, and it's pretty much just rinse and repeat the last 10 years. So it's just.
Yep. And there are some companies that have a really good development process where they will identify some folks as, maybe high management or leadership potential. And then what they'll do is intentionally put them in different situations, but not for a week or something like that, but like a 6 month rotation.
Mm.
You do this, and then after 6 months you transition and you do something completely different. And a lot of times that involves moving, and it's a whole thing. And so, for somebody who's got a family, that may be difficult, but for younger people just out of school, and then after like 2 years, they've got four completely different set of experiences in different parts of the company, and then they're ready more for a permanent role. And yeah, they only have 2 years of experience, but a lot of times that 2 years ends up being so much more valuable because they're learning these different things, as opposed to just being in one group for a while. And a lot of times it's, let's think of salespeople. You get placed in a sales role, and maybe you get a region, and you get used to that region, and it takes at least a couple months to get up to speed.
Yeah.
And then you start really cranking out, and you get to know your customers, exactly what they expect, and you do it for a couple years. You're making good money, and okay, after a few years maybe you're considering something else. But what you've learned is the very specific things going on in your region. And did you really learn stuff that is applicable to different regions? Maybe, maybe not. But if you had this sort of rotation, you probably have picked up a lot more things. And so you've done one thing for 5 years. You probably made good money, but did you set yourself up for the future? Well, maybe not. And some people are fine. Like they'll work in the same region for 30 years, and they'll make good money, and maybe they didn't really develop themselves. Maybe maybe they don't care,
Yeah.
because they made good money. So it kind of depends on the person. But from a developmental perspective, I'd much rather have somebody have a diverse set of experiences, maybe for a minimal amount of time, as opposed to a limited set of experiences for a long time.
Yeah. What's funny you mentioned that. I never realized at the time when I was knee deep into it, the wisdom of some of the fire department models that have been there for ages, right? So, I mean,
Right.
we used to joke about, the fire service, right? 200 years of tradition completely unimpeded by progress, right? So, but one of the things I didn't realize until after the fact
Uh-huh.
was, I mean, you go from, all right, I started as a firefighter all the way, I got from firefighter to the fire chief, right? And so as you go up the ranks, you're a lieutenant or a captain, and once you get promoted to a battalion chief, that's where, all right, now I'm not actually fighting the fire per se. I'm not going into the buildings.
Right.
I drive a Suburban, or I have a driver for me, and I put out the fire by talking on the radio, right?
Right.
So, and I wear a white helmet, and people call me chief, right? So
Right.
it's sort of like, they call you, in the military, they call you general. What were you, 1 star, 4 star? Makes a difference, right? But they still call you general, right? So same thing, they still call you chief. And a lot of people like that's like the pinnacle. Like if once I get to that point, I'm cool, I'm good. But most people that want to rise up, what they end up doing is once you hit that battalion chief level and you kind of get a level of competency in the operations end of it, you end up rotating.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden now you're the battalion chief in charge of training for 6 months to 2 years. Now you're in charge of fire prevention. Now you're an admin. And they rotate you through all the different parts of the
Right.
organization. And it's a great analogy to being a department head, right? I mean, at a smaller scale, that chief is in charge of training, in charge of fire prevention, in charge of whatever, right? They're
Yep.
the guy. It is funny to see them rotate around, as you mentioned. So by the time it's time to get promoted to a deputy chief or an assistant chief, going towards that one day, I want to be a fire chief or the fire chief here. You've had a couple years or even 6 months at every single part of the organization. You've been responsible for it. You've been knee deep in it. You learned about it. So that way, when you move up above it, no one's going to BS you about, oh, well, man, we've got to do this in this department. No, I ran that department. I know better. Right. So
Right.
I'm just cool that you mentioned that because that's something that's just taken for granted there. And I realize like, hey, there's a lot of wisdom in rotating people around if they're on an upward projection to a certain degree so they get that experience elsewhere.
Yeah. And a smaller company, a smaller organization is going to have sometimes a harder time doing that. But hopefully, in a smaller company, maybe this one person is responsible for multiple things, and so they don't necessarily have to rotate in the traditional sense. Um, but yeah, a larger company in the military definitely does this, especially early in people's career. Give them different experiences, and then one, hopefully that keeps them engaged and keeps them wanting to stay as opposed to bored and wanting to leave. But two, as they move up to, they have this broad level of experience and more arrows in their quiver, more things that they know how to do, more situations that they've been exposed to, and therefore they know how to solve.
Absolutely. No, that's a cool way to take a look at it. But so any other insights on the hiring and selection?
Well, yeah, I've got a lot of insights on there. That's what I've been working on for the bulk of my career, and this is what the PhD was on. So I
Yeah.
mean, in the selection context, what I want to do is have assessments, have exercises that we're sure to treat the different candidates uh, equally, at least similarly, and so we can have a reliable process, and can we have a process that fairly evaluates our candidates, and that can look very different in different situations, but I always think of a hiring process as a funnel. So you've got a lot of people at the top of the funnel, and then at each step in the process, you're doing something to eliminate a certain percent. And so early in the process, I want something that is highly scalable and not really dependent on people to be involved in. And so that's where I can have um, computer assessments, psychometric assessments. I can have different descriptions of the jobs, realistic job previews, kind of things, and maybe in a video that I can put the applicants, the candidates through that process, and they can complete the assessment, hopefully complete the assessment successfully, and they can see more information about the job. Hopefully they're going to say, yeah, I like this type of thing, but I'm also happy if they say I don't want to do that kind of thing, and then they voluntarily withdraw from the process. But regardless, treat everybody in the same way. And so at the end of it, I can personally interact with a relatively small number of people that have already been screened at multiple processes.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of, like you said, here are the baseline qualifications. Here is the resume review. And it's funny, I love to get your thoughts on this. It just kind of came to mind. I was watching an interview and somebody had mentioned about say males versus females, and a lot of times the interview process or the application process. And they said, guys are more likely to just apply for the darn thing anyway, even if they're like, yeah, I got 3/4 of this, but there's a couple of these required things I don't have. But they said a lot of times females are like, well, I don't have everything, so I won't apply.
Right.
So
Well, it's funny. I've heard that statement
yeah,
multiple times. I've read it in multiple situations, and in some cases they will cite specific research. And well, let's see. Let's look at the underlying research, and does it support that? And I'm no, it doesn't.
gotcha.
So yeah, there are some differences between males and females, but some of the things I've seen cited on this topic will be like, you know, the majority of males will apply for jobs if they've 75% of the qualifications. The majority of females won't apply unless they have all of the qualifications, and that simple difference between males and females is just not true.
Gotcha. Well, I figured that one, you've been knee deep in that section of the literature a lot more than I have. But like I said, just because you hear it out in the ethos somewhere, just out in the ether somewhere in the internet doesn't mean it's true. But there's a lot of adages and sayings and statements and truthisms that are
right,
floating around out there that you're like a complete bunk. But it's always good to like, okay, well, I hear this. So what's your experience on that? Because I know personal experience. I've looked at different jobs in the past. So like, got. Yeah, I ain't got that. Like, I'm not even
right,
gonna bother. Right? I was like,
right,
am I like sunk costs? I'm like, am I gonna put an hour or 2 hours into this arduous, painful, this shouldn't be that difficult application when I know I don't have something that is a key disqualifier? Like,
right,
I don't have 10 years in a IT SaaS industry.
right,
Okay,
right.
well, I'm not even going to even think about it. Like the rest of it. Yeah, I could knock out of the park. I don't have that, and that's a a killer one way or the other. Like I'm not. I hate to sound lazy, but I'm like I'm not putting my hours spent into that much work into something that good and well. It's like yeah, trash.
Yeah, and what's interesting is with the jobs posted on LinkedIn and maybe on some of the other job boards, you can see how many people have applied or at least clicked the apply button, whether or
Yeah,
not maybe they actually applied. And and a lot of times there will be these jobs that are posted, and then later in the day you'll look at it and it'll say like 200 plus applicants. And when you see that, then you go, well, should I even spend the time applying? And if so, maybe I would only do it if I checked every single one of the boxes. But when I talk to companies on the receiving end of this, that's a lot of times what they'll say is we'll post a job and then like the next day we'll have 500 applicants. And the question is, well, 500 is a completely unmanageable number. How do I get to a manageable number? And then it's okay, well, a person has to check every one of those boxes is an easy thing to use to screen your applicants. And so I think at least in the past it has always been a good idea where yeah, if maybe if you have 75% of the qualifications, it makes sense to apply. But if you have 75% of the qualifications and you see that 500 people have applied for the job already, mm,
mm,
is it worth the time? Because I know that the recruiters are probably not even seeing your resume unless you check every single one of those boxes.
and it makes perfect sense. And from a logistics standpoint, you get where they're coming from 100%. I mean, how are you going to check the LinkedIn profile or the resume for 500 people?
Yeah, yeah, you can't. No one can, and uh, companies are using AI based screening methods, review methods, assessment methods. But it seems like candidates are also using AI based ways of applying for jobs. And so um, it gets a little tricky. And as we're in 2025 now, it's one computer generated process versus a different computer generated process, and you're butting heads a little bit there. That's what a lot of companies seem to say. When I say they say that a lot of candidates seem to be more computer generated as opposed to real. I don't know if that's a real issue or not, but again, companies seem to suspect that that is the case, and so I don't have a reason to not believe them.
No, I believe it. It intuitively makes sense, but same thing. And when you look at it, you see a couple of folks. I love because LinkedIn's a great example. You see
Hmm.
300 people applied, and then if you scroll down, depending on the level you have, most of the people applied had this level of education, and they came from this industry. So you see a
Uh,
little bit of the breakdown of that, and you're like,
right.
God, you wonder like, okay, this recruiter is just inundated with all of these people, and at some point, it's like, yeah, it is honestly, and I'm not talking about an interview. Say a company has a bunch of different positions. Sometimes I don't, and you, if you know, please throw it out there. But you almost wonder, like, not a headhunter, not a recruiter, but it's almost like maybe the recruiting people that wants to talk to, it's like, hey, I'm interested in working for your company. You've got tons of different job openings. Let me tell you why I'm interested in a little bit about my background, and where do you think it would be a good fit for me to drop into this organization versus me applying for a job that I think might be good, but you don't.
Right.
I mean, I've recommended people. I've had guys that I knew applying for jobs. Perfect example. Had a friend of mine, good guy, solid dude, trying to move to the area, applying for, I was, Navy Federal Credit Union, for example. Well, if I know one of the recruiting guys there, the guy applied for the job, and I might send a letter, I might send an email to the guy that I know who's the recruiter. Hey, dude, I'm not saying this guy applied. I'm not saying hiring for the job. I don't know what job would be fit, but hey, it might be worth your time to touch base with this dude to kind of see where he would be a good fit in the organization. I wouldn't send this to you if he wasn't solid. So what are your thoughts on, when you're looking at a big company and someone wants to come in, you're like, just like, God, I just want to have the conversation with somebody on where they think would be a great fit for my skill set versus randomly applying for 16 jobs and never hearing anything back.
Right. Yes, that sounds like a good idea. And in the past, I think that was much more common. Again, these days, it seems like there are so many more candidates for each job opening. And again, whether that's real or artificial,
Yeah.
that some of the recruiters that I talk to don't seem to have the time for those personalized interactions. Now, and again, this is the world that we live in. There are AI systems that will help guide people towards the right department, the right jobs, the right job openings, based on their background. And so and this is really only relevant for the very large companies,
Yeah.
but some of the times the computer based and now the AI based systems are ones that really direct candidates to the most appropriate places as opposed to screen the candidates. And so that's even before a person is a candidate at all.
That makes sense. They're just, one of those things where you would think at some point, now granted, I get they need to get butts in seats. That's what they're getting paid for.
Right.
But at some point when you have somebody who's interested in going into a particular field or going to, hey, I want to work for XYZ company, having that kind of personal interaction with somebody like, hey, here's where I'm at, my experience, what I've done. Where would you recommend getting placed? So it's almost like they still put a butt in a seat, but they're able to put maybe a better quality person versus, hey, I might hire this guy for this entry or mid-level position. He's much more qualified over here. Yeah, you get the, I want to just get my foot in the door. You hear that all the time. I just want to get my foot in the door with XYZ company, and then I can worry about moving up there. Well,
Yep.
I'd love to hear your experience on it, and then we'll go into the first question. But I've seen folks that say, I want to get my foot in the door, and if they come in as entry-level Joe, unfortunately, the organization, their frame of reference for this guy is entry-level Joe. Well, entry-level Joe might actually be better suited for Director Joe, Department Head Joe, right? That's his experience or whatever. But he just wants to get his foot in the door, so he comes in at this lower level. Well, now that you're framed, they don't know you from Adam. So they framed you as entry-level Joe. Well, oh my God, who's this guy I think he is? He's going to try to get up to be the director in 2 years. It's like, he should have got to be he should have came in as the director. So what are your thoughts on getting a foot in the door, trying to come in, boom, 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 get to the right place versus coming in at that higher level in the organization?
Yeah, that foot in the door notion is again trickier these days, because, and again, talking to companies, they're looking for candidates that exactly match roles to a large extent, and so exactly matching the roles, and so not somebody who's too high of a level. So that the notion of overqualified seems to be more of an issue these days, just because, as I brought up multiple times now, the sheer volume of candidates that most companies are receiving for so many different jobs is they're looking for any number of ways to to screen people out right at the beginning. And so probably if there's a job that says 5 years of experience and somebody has 15 years of experience, yeah, they crossed that 5 year threshold 10 years ago, but the company may be using a window of experience, 5 to 10 years, and so somebody may never see that 15-year person, and so it's trickier than it's ever been before, because of the volume of candidates. But it's funny, we have so many candidates, and yet companies will still say they have a hard time getting highly skilled people because they're looking for very, very, very specific skills.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I had friend of mine, and then we'll close out this segment. We'll get into the questions in the next segment. I had a friend of mine who was a regional loss manager for a big retailer, like big, like pretty high level position, right? He'd been doing this for ages. Great guy, really sharp. They basically contracted out and just obliterated their whole loss prevention department, right? And so he's out of a job.
Uh,
And so he's literally like, "Hey, I got a house, I got a mortgage, I got, I'll take whatever," right? And he ran into
right,
so many, "You're overqualified, you got too much experience, you're gonna leave as soon as something else comes in." And he's like, "And I need to keep the roof over the head, lights on, food on the table, man. I Look, you give me an
right,
opportunity, I'll stick with you." And there were so many of them that just would not give the opportunity because of the overqualified. And that, part of it might be the age, part of it might be whatever, but he just took a beating for a extensive period of time. Now he ended up finding basically an equivalent job with a different company, fine now, but it took way longer than it should have. And they took the overqualified stick and beat the crap out of him with it, man. I mean, he couldn't find anything for ages. I mean, to the point where, like, hey, we've got to downsize houses, we got to cut, we got to whatever, because the problem of trying to find a job, and he was willing to do anything. It's not like he was, "Oh, I'm not applying for that job, I'm too good for this." No, he's like, "I'm literally applying for any and everything that's anywhere close." But to your point, I've got 20 years experience that's asking for 2 to 3 or 2 to 5, and they won't hire me for this because they're like, "Oh, well, you're not going to stay long." But still complaining about they can't find candidates.
right, right. But and there are two sides of this. So he would have applied for these jobs that are a lower level than he used to be, applying for the jobs that are companies are thinking of, yeah, the 2 to 5 year person as opposed to the 15 to 20 year person. And if he would have gotten one of those entry medium level jobs, would he have continued looking for the more senior level role? And I'm not.
Yeah, yeah.
Now we can go to the theoretical person.
Yeah,
Largely, they would still continue. So from the company's perspective, from the recruiter's perspective, of being concerned about, well, I would hire them, but they wouldn't really stay long in that position. That's actually a valid concern that would probably be a fair one. Now, maybe that person could add so much value in the 6 months that they were there before they got a more senior job that it wouldn't matter. But that is a valid concern. I did some research about this notion of overqualification
yeah.
and specifically a recruiter's perception of overqualification. And yeah, that was the concern is two things. Would they stay long? And then also, would their salary requirements be more than the job would be able to provide? Now, even compared to 2 3 years ago, you see more job postings with the salary range, and so maybe that's less of a concern on the salary side. But still, would the person be happy to stay, or would they would get the job and still look for other jobs? Is not an unreasonable concern.
No, and I don't think it is at all. But I would really be interested in research on something specific as far as this goes. One, if you had two groups, you had
Yep.
the group that was overqualified versus the group that quote unquote met the qualifications. How long does the overqualified people stay versus the other people? Because people churn jobs so much nowadays. Are they really going to take this guy that meets the qualifications or maybe a little bit less, and he's going to stay 5 years and this guy's going to stay 5 months?
Right.
Maybe. Then again, you look at now that they're posting pay ranges. Yeah. And how much of it is, okay, I've got start pay, top pay, right? Mid
Yep.
range. Maybe this guy, he wants mid range or higher, okay, to do the job where I can, and he would be great and he would probably stay a while. Like top pay would, or close to that, between mid and top pay would probably be close enough for government work for his salary requirements. But man, it's a whole lot cheaper to hire a couple folks at starting pay. And I could pay this junior guy starting pay versus this more senior guy top pay. Then obviously you get into the question of value. You know, how much
Right.
value they bring, because they're probably bringing director level value at a manager or supervisor level, right? Because, and that top pay is well worth the money. But I'm just curious on churn and turnover rates on hiring the overqualified, and oh, they're not going to stay that long, versus how long are they staying compared to the people that are qualified or not overqualified.
Right.
What's the tenure length? I mean, what's the? I'm just curious to be what the difference would be. And there may not be research on it, but I'd be
Right.
fascinated to find out what's the legitimate worry, 100%. But I'm wondering what's the objective fact. Like there is
Yeah.
the male, female, putting in for positions, right? And there's research behind it. My God, I mean, it's like now I know I've got something to report back.
Right. I don't know that there's research addressing the question that you just asked. It would be really great if there was. That type of research is going to be tricky. Again, when I was researching the idea of overqualified, it was how recruiters are evaluating candidates,
Mhm.
and so it's kind of a theoretical in general how they're evaluating candidates. We can also think of this topic of qualification and overqualification. Just what does it mean to be qualified for a job? And specifically in the past, when someone would say, "Oh, she's the most qualified for the job," they were specifically talking about years of experience and education level. And I guess I care less about a lot of those things, and I care more about potential for success in the job, both in the short term and the long term. And that's what I think about when I say qualification. And so yeah, years of experience, education level, that has how we have historically defined who is qualified, who is unqualified for the job. I'm willing to just throw those things out. And, this is one PhD talking to another PhD saying, yeah, education level is not really important. It's the potential for success over the long term or the short term. It depends on where exactly you care about. And then the question is going to be, well, how do we assess who is going to be most successful in the short term and the long term? And then you move from these education and experience levels and into the realm of assessments and exercises that will run our candidates through. And that's where I care more. That's where I think our attention should be focused.
No, it makes sense. And like I said, it's funny because people look at you like you have three heads and like you can't be serious. But you're like, yes, I might have a PhD, but I'm not hanging everything on the mantle of education, right? That doesn't mean that,
Right.
okay, just because you've got 16 degrees, you got whatever, that you're qualified for this, or that's the best route for everybody to go. You know what I mean? It's people got to figure out what's best for themselves, and what's out there, and what's skills and trades for, and apprenticeships and training versus 4-year degrees. Like I said, if you're coming out with a degree in medicine to get when you get a degree to get a certain license, and that license affords you a job, whether it's an architect,
Right.
engineer, lawyer, accountant, physician, those types of things. All right, that's just the entry. That's the cost of entry to get the license, and the license gets you the job, right?
Yep.
But like I said, that's a whole different ball game on. I'm just going to get a something you can appreciate. I'm going to get a bachelor's in psychology
Yeah.
and think I'm going to come out and get a job. That's like getting a bachelor's in biology and think you're going to get something in the medical field. Like, that's
Right.
nice, Sparky, but that's just going to get you like the prereq to get into med school to actually get the real piece of paper. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
And that's what I advise people regularly about going into psychology. And it's like, yeah, go in, get your degree in psychology if you want, but if you're serious about it, you have to know that you need at least a master's degree. If you're getting a bachelor's degree in psychology, you're not really qualified for anything. Um, so yeah, I mean, you can go get there are jobs out there, but there are way too many people, working in restaurants and baristas at Starbucks who have 4-year degrees in psychology. And you don't want to say that they wasted their time, but that degree didn't afford them a better opportunity for a specific job. Some of the jobs that you brought up are ones that do require a specific license and a specific degree. And so that's not just some sort of generic 4-year degree. That
no,
is a very specific degree that maybe gets them into grad school, which gets them, or med school or whatever, to get the job, or that gets them the opportunity to maybe pass some sort of test to be licensed in that specific industry. But those are the minority of industries, so that's the exception more than the rule.
right. I mean, you think guys that are architects, engineers, typically it's a 4-year degree. Then you take your licensing exams, you get the license, right? You get
Yep.
and you have certain things. I, what kind of job am I going to get with a 4-year degree in political science, right?
Right.
But I can take that if I've got prereqs and a good LSAT thing, and I can get into law school, come out,
Yep.
same thing, get a job. No different than, I've got something in biology. Whoopie do, a bachelor's in biology is not going to get you a job. But if you have that and all your prereqs and a decent MCAT score, you can get into med school, which will get you. So there's some that the end licensing exam is the end of the 4 years. Some of it, the 4 year, like you said, is just the prereq to the grad school part that
Yep.
I need to do to get that. But like I said, if you're trying to make money in psychology or have a career or anything, like I said, unless you want to license counsel, license social worker, something like that, the most part, like you got to commit to, I'm going to go all the way to the PhD level, whether it's
Yeah.
INO psych, clinical psych, whatever, school psychologist. I've got to, if I want to do this for a career, this is going to be a long-term track, right? No different
Yep.
than any of these other ones. There's some of them that you just got to commit to get to the finish line versus that 4-year degree is not going to help you as far as getting a job. Now, I've seen people get a bachelor's in psychology and then go into some kind of business or some kind of other, like the end goal is something else, but they want the people part of it from the psychology to supplement the whatever. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe they get the psychology degree and the prereqs before they go
Right.
to med school or before they go to law school. Who knows? But that's not the end point to be able to actually get a career. It's either just a supplement for something else or the stepping off point.
Yeah. And I think even more than it used to be, knowledge is important. Competencies are important, but the universities are not the only place to get these things, right?
Now,
You can learn so much for free these days, and it doesn't even involve going physically to a library. You can learn so much going on YouTube. You can learn so much from podcasts. You can learn so much for free that for success in jobs, I care about what does this person know much more than where they got it from.
yeah,
And besides the fact that and now you're right, exactly. And now this is where my wife accuses me of like university bashing, where it's like, okay, they're not the only place to get knowledge,
no,
and they're charging way too much for tuition, and it's taken these students 4+ years to get their bachelor's degree when, for the level of knowledge that they're acquiring, it probably shouldn't take them 4 years. And so not only is it not the only place that they can get it, universities take too long and charge way too much. Well, that seems like a problem on multiple levels. And,
Yes,
forgetting the fairness issue, where the the rich kids can afford this much more than the people from other backgrounds, where we're having students get six figures of debt for this degree that maybe isn't providing them the value that it should.
correct. That's why when you're really looking at it, my personal opinion, then we'll go ahead and wrap up, is if you're going in it for a specific license for a specific job, I want to be X and I need to get Y degree to do that, go for it. That's awesome. If you're going into
Yep.
it as, I'm not looking for this to get me a job, I'm looking for this to be the well-rounded liberal arts education, okay, great. That's a whole different story. I'll get stuff elsewhere. But to your point, there's so many, and I saw one from Harvard, but almost every university has these MOOCs, these massive online open courses. And you can take these courses from
Yep.
Harvard, from Stanford, from wherever for free. There's these massive open online courses that you can take and get all kinds of knowledge from huge reputable universities that don't cost a dime. And like I said, I've completed this course, I've taken this certification, I've done this, I've done that. And a lot of times those can be massive as far as for a job on, here's the skills and competencies that I have versus interdisciplinary underwater basket weaving. Done. Check.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly right. And more in the future, the knowledge and the different ways of people can develop themselves are going to be available and largely available for free. And the universities really have to think about, okay, where is their place in the future of, personal professional development? Because they don't hold a patent on these things. They're not the only ones who can do it. And even online universities, that type of thing can be done so much cheaper than physically going on campus and paying for overpriced food and all that stuff. I just and I hate to sound pessimistic about the future of universities, but it's like, man, I see a bunch of ways that the whole university model can go south, and they have to be on the lookout. Otherwise, some of these universities are gonna all of a sudden their students are going to be going elsewhere, and not going elsewhere, you know, for no reason, going elsewhere because there's more value elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, we'll end this thing with this. There's a university I'm familiar with that they're a small university. Their enrollment is constantly going up. They're doing really well, but there's some
Yep.
folks that are on some of their advisory boards that are realizing, hey, in the next 3 years, they're predicting there's just to fall off the cliff. Okay, we kind of got an idea it's coming. At least they're being proactive on what can we do? How can we make changes? How can we pivot? How can we do whatever to be ahead of the curve and not just we're going to keep doing what we've been doing and pray everything keeps going well. And then all of a sudden, maybe there's a change to the subsidized student loan programs. Maybe there's a massive change of what I mean. It's 2025. We're at the beginning of the year. There's new administration coming. God only knows what's going to
Yep.
happen. I'm pretty sure they're not going to say, "Hey, we're going to forgive all the student loans." I think that's a safe bet, right? I think that ship is sailed, right? so,
Definitely. Yeah.
so I don't think that one's coming. But I think in some ways there may be some structural changes that really precipitate this drop off. But I think some of the really good colleges and universities are going to realize, hey, what can I do to catch the current trends and still stay viable? And where are we going to have to trim fat? Where are we going to have to get lean on our administration? Where are we going to have to do these different things and be able to still offer value and be able to stay viable in the next 5-10 years? But you're absolutely right. Big changes are coming, I think. And like I said, they realize that people are realizing, like I said, they don't hold the monopoly on it. And I think there's a little bit of disheartening and maybe not quite to the point of betrayal, but maybe it is. It's like, hey, I was told if I do good in high school and I come out and I do the college thing and that's going to be my key to success, which it was for a lot of people. Maybe there's just so much of it now. Since it's not the key, it's like, okay, well, where else is there opportunity for me to go and do and be successful? So we'll see what happens in the next couple of years as far as higher education goes. But yes, it does seem somewhat ironic with two folks with university PhDs to be somewhat critical of and the university system, at least in its trajectory now.
Yeah, yeah. But there again, knowledge is important. Skills development is important.
Yes.
Um, and universities feels like should be involved in that. But I think changes are in order, and not little tweaks, but like massive substantive changes are in order.
Yes. Well, maybe in the next segment, we'll talk a little bit more about the practitioner scholar model versus just the pure academician. But with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this segment of Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We will be back for our questions in just a moment. Welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We are here with Dr. Mark Smith, and we are going to jump headlong into our first question. So, Mark, what does leadership mean to you, and what does good leadership look like?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I remember answering this before. We'll see if my answer is the same as it was, a few months ago. Yeah, you can go so many different ways with this question. I think, to a large extent, a good leader is the one that has the right team, working for him or her, and that doesn't always mean the best individuals, but that means the right team, the right people in the right places at the right time.
Mm.
And so that really gels with what I've been doing for the bulk of my career, which is candidate evaluation, and helping companies determine who is the best person to hire in the moment. And as I talked about, previously, that gets into lots of questions like what does it mean to be qualified for the job, and what does that look like in context. And so yeah, good leadership to a large extent involves making sure that the right people are on the team, and then you can move into getting people in the right spots on the field or the right positions and doing the right things. But first things first, getting the right people on the team.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. What
And there are going to be multiple ways that you can ensure that you have the right people on the team. And again, we've talked about previously the hiring funnel, and the companies get so many people at the top of the funnel, and there are some funny ways that they're evaluating candidates. But how at the very end of the hiring process are you ensuring that you have the right person identified? Because a lot of times there's a job opening and you can only hire one person. And if you get 5 people that you like, that's fine and great. More is always better, but you can't hire all 5. You have to determine the individual to hire. And so how do you determine? And let's say you have that situation. You have a job opening,
right?
You're looking for something fairly specific, and you find that person, but you don't find that person. You find 5 of those people. How are you going to determine which of those 5 to hire? And companies have tried different things over time, and that's really where I'm spending my time these days, is helping companies at that stage of the process. So you've got 2 people that seem good, or maybe you've got 3 people that all are, nobody's really sure about them, and they want, okay, is one of these guys, are they any good? And again, that's where I'm spending more of my time these days, at the bottom of the hiring funnel, not at the top of the hiring funnel.
No, it makes perfect sense, because if you think about it, I mean, what Maxwell talked about, if if you're on a journey and you turn around and no one's following you, you're just going for a walk. You know what I mean? You're not leading anybody, you're just going. So
Right.
who are the people that are following you? And like I said, if you're able to assemble especially when you talk about the top levels. I mean, we've talked about this before. There's so much research that's out there on the importance and the disproportionate impact on the senior leadership team, the executive leadership team, on the entire organization as a whole. Those folks, not just I hired because this person is a great CFO and they're a masterful accountant and they're great with the numbers. Well, if they can't get along and jive with the
Right.
rest of the senior leadership team, did you really pick the best person? Or, like I said, you got to work together as a team. Like I said, not just have a core group of individuals that are great at what they do. The operations guy is amazing. The CFO person is amazing. The chief HR person is great with what they do. And none of these fools can get along together to save their life. How effective is your senior leadership team going to be, even if they're the best candidate, the best in their industry you can get? And if they're not gelling as a good team, then how do you think that's impacting the organization going down?
Yeah, and you bring up these situations which are real situations that we deal with all the time. It's yeah, the person who is the chief finance officer in the company got to that level because they were the best accountant years ago, and they sort of rose up because of their technical skills. But at that higher level, it doesn't take the technical skills. Now, you I think you need to have that technical background just to have people respect you.
Correct.
But that's not what is going to determine your success. Your success is going to be determined by your communication skills, your adaptability, your relationship building, all these things that would fall in the soft skills category or in the emotional intelligence category. Those are the things that are going to be determining uh, a higher level person's success, not the technical skills. But I think people are able to assess technical skills fairly well.
Right.
Um, that's obvious to people, and they want to, I think, reward the people who have the best technical skills. Which is not to say that you shouldn't consider that at all, but that should not be the deciding factor. Oh yeah, we're gonna promote this person to a company leadership position because they were the best, most skilled person at the individual contributor level. Nope, nope. That is the wrong way to do it. That is, and that is as the way that so many companies do it.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because it's funny you were talking about levels in the funnel, and you talk about EQ and you talked about soft skill competencies, two of my favorite things. And like I said, I love the valid psychometric assessments that can easily identify those, and more specifically, not just identify them, but okay, well, we've determined what of these that the job needs first. I mean, EQ is EQ,
Right.
high or low. But I mean, when you talk about what are the soft skill competencies that this job needs versus what that job needs, and a lot of them are similar, especially at that level. But that being a good top to mid level funnel, you know, sorting mechanism. And then once you say, okay, well, this guy and this gal, these people that are the top three, top five, do have the soft skill competence. They are high in EQ. They do have some of the people skills that we need. Now let's worry about fine tuning your bottom of the funnel, the situational analysis, like scenario based. Let's do the role play stuff. Let's figure out based on these specific situations which one of these really is dial it into the best one that we need to choose. Because, like I said, five people that are great, can't hire all five. What do you got to do? The
Right.
process that you espouse, that you use all the time, is a great way to take those. God, I just can't, either I can't. I like how you put it. I All three are perfect, and I don't know which one to choose. Versus all three are okay. Is there one that really stands out above the rest
Right.
that meet that criteria? So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how, when you're talking about assembling that team, how much the upper and middle funnel stuff kind of gets you the better candidates, or gets you the people that have those requisite soft skills, people skills, to that way you can really then fine tune your selection on, okay, well, of these, which one is truly got what it takes to do this position. And then
Right.
once they're in the position, because you've got so many different personalities and so many different things that drive and motivate people, like I said, I'm looking at it not from a selection camp impact, but just from taking some of that data that you have and being able to say, okay, as a senior leadership team, as an executive team, where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, how does everybody process information, what drives and motivates everybody, and then those guys learning all of that about themselves to really build that strategically cohesive, structure that leadership team to where they're on the same page and they're really firing on all eight. So that way it kind of goes back to some of the research on, high performing organizations, having and high levels of engagement, having those super high performing and aligned senior leadership teams. But like I said, you got to get the good people on there first to be able to actually have, something to work with.
Right. And I want to talk about some of these things that you brought up more specifically. First,
Yeah.
just a point that you just raised is it's not always hiring the best person overall. It's hiring the best person for your company or for this role. Um, there are lots of organizations that there's just something unique about them, especially sort of at the higher level, and uh, the right person for this particular job in this particular company may not be the right person for most other companies in that job, and that's okay. You need to be sure that you have an assessment process which helps to describe these people well enough and not just put words to them, but accurately describes them and really predicts what they're going to be like in the future, which is more what I care about, in such a way that I can say, I think that we should hire her for this company. Now, if there were 10 other similar companies, I may not make that recommendation, but this company,
Gotcha.
because this company is all about caring. Um, maybe this is a relationship person, and that's really what she's based on. This person is the best one there. For a different company, I would say, oh, she would be a terrible candidate.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's not always about best, worst. It's about who is the best fit for this particular role in this particular company. And again, you get very specific, and that kind of fine grained evaluation, uh, you can't do that with these really broad tests. You need some more specific evaluation process,
Right.
and
What if you
and
go from
that's
like telescope to a microscope? You know what I mean? You're going from
yeah
broad in the funnel aspect is exactly you're going from big to small. And I mean there's different mechanisms work better at different levels of the funnel. And when you get down to the microscope level, you're absolutely right. It goes, I think what you just said, it goes down to fit and culture.
yeah
Like I said, this person might be the caring person might be great for this organization that's very relationship oriented versus, hey, I've got a more of a cutthroat organization, good, not good or bad, just is. This person would not be the best fit culturally over
right.
here.
Right. Yeah. That's right. And so how I help companies with the evaluation of candidates at that level is through role playing exercises,
Cool.
and sometimes I'll refer to it as the show me, don't tell me method. So in the interview process, people are telling you what they've done in the past or what they would do in the future, and that can be helpful, but that's not going to tell you the whole story. It's not going to tell you, what will this person do, what can this person do. And so in a role playing exercise, in a role playing assessment, what I do is and you can do it relatively quickly, is you give candidates some information. Okay, you're going to have a fake interaction with an assessor. Here is the background of this company, this fake company, and here is the situation that you're going to encounter. Here is the person that you're going to meet with, and you give them some information. It doesn't have to be a ton of information,
Right.
and some time. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. And so how I do it is everything can be done in an hour. So you send candidates materials. They have 20 minutes to evaluate the materials. Then you have a 20-minute interaction with the role player. And then there's a bit of a debrief interview at the end, which is how you get to your hour total. And in the role play exercise, you are interacting with somebody that you've never met before, uh, in a very work oriented kind of context, and you have some background. But the whole thing is you don't have all of the background. And so you have to interact with this person to get more information from them and to develop a relationship with them and to adapt when they add new information to the situation. And you have to make decisions on the fly. And so all of these things start to be thrown at you relatively quickly, but not in a weird or artificial or out of context way.
Right.
And then it doesn't take too long, and you can figure out, okay, who is adaptable enough, who can make good decisions on the fly, who can communicate well, who can relate well with other people, who can be a leader in a situation like this. And not everybody can. And that's how I think we can get over some of the big question marks about who would be best fit for a specific role in a specific company.
Well, I just like the fact of really incorporating the company culture into it and not as much of, all right, well, here's the job description, here's the technical requirements, here's the years of experience. Like, so you get past all of that and get to, okay, well, not only can this person make decisions on the fly and be a good leader, but are they a fit for the way the organization wants
Right.
their mission, their vision, their value, how they want to run the company, how just their general philosophy in doing things. Because I've seen so many people that are great, like you said, great candidates, but not cultural fits. And that can get ugly.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, you want to hire great candidates, and yeah, that's right. But a great candidate for one situation, a great candidate in one organization, is not necessarily a great candidate for another organization. And you can't usually tell those things from computer tests or even from interviews. You can kind of tell it from the interview, but let me run them through some of these exercises. I'm not saying I'm perfect or we're perfect in this type of evaluation, but the level of information that you get is different. It's fundamentally different.
Well, and I think when you stack them all together too, I mean, I understand, you know, how does somebody process information? What are their
Yeah.
soft skill competencies and what drives them? Okay, when that's like I said, way higher up in the funnel. But when I finish the role play and I get the data and I go to actually um, make a decision, now I've got layer upon layer of information to make a good decision, and I know what I'm getting, and I know when I bring them in, how best to onboard and develop them on the team because I have this depth of information that's way beyond just a resume review and an interview.
Yeah. 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 And so, that becomes useful for the person that you hire. But the hiring context isn't the only situation to use these. So some of the times hiring becomes not necessarily who to bring in externally, but who to promote from an internal group of candidates. And so let's say we've got 5 people on the team, and one of
Mm.
them is going to be the team leader. Well, we can run all 5 of them through this kind of exercise. One person is promoted based on the results of the exercise, but the other 4 people who weren't promoted have a good, valid, interesting, useful assessment report that can be used for development purposes that a year later, 2 years later, maybe they will be good to be promoted. And so that becomes a very useful exercise, one for the person who was hired or promoted, but two, even for the people who weren't promoted, that can be very useful information for them. Now, for the people externally who you run through this process that you don't hire, maybe you never use that assessment report after you decided that you're not hiring them. But
All right, so I definitely like that one. So let's get into the second question here, and maybe we can expound on some of the things we already talked about. But so, what is the biggest leadership challenge you've had to face?
Yeah, the biggest leadership challenge, for me as a leader, well, let me sort of project that on other people.
Sure.
It's the changing of the status quo, right?
Mm,
We're used to doing things in a certain way, but whether the situation changed or new information comes up, and getting folks to change, and again, I'm as susceptible to it as anyone else. I'm used to something, and there are so many things that we do that we don't necessarily see the outcome of it, and so we do it confidently. We sort of hope that it's right, but we don't actually have any like empirical evidence to know that it's working or not working. And so again, most of us will just sort of assume that okay, yeah, this felt good, and so everything is fine. And in the hiring context, which is how I view so many things.
right.
In the hiring context, it's the person who you hired, and you know how things transpire after that. But there are so many people who you didn't hire, and you don't know, would they have been better? Would they have been worse? There are lots of jobs. There are lots of situations where, and I don't mean this in a terrible way, but virtually nobody could be successful, right? There are something in the situation or the people there where people are set up to fail. And then there are other jobs where the processes are in place. There's a bunch of good people around where virtually anybody could be successful. Now, some people could be more successful than others, certainly, but like nobody is going to fail in some situations. And in other situations, everyone is going to fail. And so when you're making these hiring decisions, how do you know that you've made the right decision? And of course, the answer is you don't. And even after the fact, you can say, okay, this person, stayed a long time or seemed to improve his or her department or whatever. But you still don't really know, would they have been better or worse than the other people that you were considering? And so therefore, there isn't always a crying need for changes in the evaluation process or changes in the hiring process. But we do know, in research that we've done historically and typically across organizations, that there are good ways of evaluating leaders. There are good ways of making sure that the right person is hired. And again, you have to do that research over time, over situations in order to know that right. And so, um, what the types of things that I do would fall into what we have historically called assessment centers. So
Right.
that is where the role play assessment would typically be classified. Now, an assessment center historically has been multiple assessment methods. It used to be a physical location. That's not really the case anymore. But multiple assessment methods, multiple assessors, typically leading to an assessment report. And so how this would look is, um, candidates being given multiple psychometric tests, cognitive tests, personality tests. They go through an interview. They go through not just a role playing exercise, but typically multiple role playing exercise. It often would involve an inbox exercise, which even that is like, that it feels dated now.
Yeah.
Um, and so multiple assessments, multiple ways of evaluating them, and it was a long process. It was naturally a headache for everyone. It was expensive, but what the validation research showed that this was a very good predictor of who was going to be successful.
Right.
Okay, but it's a headache and incredibly expensive. Can we lessen the headache, and can we reduce the price? And with
Exactly.
so many things these days, because of technology, we've been able to reduce the headache, reduce the price substantially.
Well, and it's funny when you mentioned assessment centers and you started doing the descriptions. One of the first things that come to my mind from personal experience was the entrance exams. to a degree, the entrance process to a degree for candidate selection for like the fire department,
Yep.
but more specifically, the promotional process.
Exactly.
That's the big one. Like I said, you have a certain degree of I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but when you really start getting into the role play, you start getting into the nitty gritty of everything you mentioned. That to me, I was like, man, that just screams fire department promotional process, right?
Yeah.
On a whole bunch of different levels. And I remember even years ago interviewing one time for a smaller city fire chief, and they had a day long, like I said, it was inbox exercise. They sent you some stuff, and hey, prepare this scenario
Yep.
and come be prepared to like kind of like a role play to a city council type thing, or budget meeting type thing, based on these certain, here's the situation, tell us what you would do kind of thing. And it was, obviously no win, but it was like, okay, well, what's the best of the bad decisions that we can kind of come up with, right? There's
Right.
four things that need money and we only got money for
Yep.
three. How are we going to do this kind of thing?
Right.
Whatever. But yeah, that is funny. That just kind of screamed that. But you're right. I mean, that, at least that had some validation to it. But you're right. Terribly expensive, terribly cumbersome. But depending on the level of the position, it's one of those things. Okay, it's worth putting that money and
Yep.
putting the butt factor into this to get the right candidate that's going to stay for a long period of time versus getting a bunch of turnover. Now, one of the things you mentioned, what's going back to one job I particularly worked at, I laugh because they brought in somebody at a kind of a senior leadership level, department head, and wonderful. I mean, Babe Ruth called you 425 in the left field wall, right? I mean, just nailed the interview. Like, this is the guy, man. He is amazing. Pedigree, education, experience, interview. I mean, if you were in Vegas, you'd have bet on
Right.
on this guy. And the guy who interviewed and the guy that showed up was not the same person. Fingerprints were the same, DNA was the same. That wasn't the same person that interviewed. And it was funny because maybe 6 months in, they realized, man, we screwed the pooch. But the thing that got me, and I'd love to hear your, I'll tell you this in that scenario, I'd love to hear your context and your thoughts on it, especially like once they hire, like sometimes you're out of it. But two things. One, I felt like there was a lot of ego from the guy who did the actual final decision, the hiring manager, on it's going to make me look bad if I cut the dead weight too soon
Yep.
because I made a bad decision. And trust me, that person was not going to admit to that. And then the organization was like, well, when we hire somebody at this level, we at least give them 2 years. But it's like at 4 to 6 months, you realize this was a horrible candidate that was killing morale in the department. People were leaving, productivity was down. I mean, all the factors, right? And so, I'm interested to hear your viewpoint on that. And then you talk about a hiring for a job that was meant to fail. Another job was hired in this guy, and then all of a sudden, this poor director that I was talking about, this poor executive that I was talking about, decided, hey, we're going to do this, HR job analysis on you because I don't think you're doing your job. Couldn't find out that person, when HR finished doing what HR does, that person was doing 4 FTEs worth of work.
Mm.
And so you want to talk about the setup to fail. Like, yeah,
Right.
could somebody be less disastrous than others? Yeah. But I mean, how are you going to do a setup to fail when you're doing 3, 4, 5 FTEs worth of work for one person? Like, how there's no setup for success on that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'd be interested to get your thoughts on both of those.
Well, so this comes down to when we're making decisions about people, it is inherently complex. And I think more so than most people realize, people are difficult to pin down. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. I'm not the same person I will be 5 years from now.
Yeah.
But even more than that, I'm not the same person today versus tomorrow versus the next day, right? and it's not that my personality is inherently changing, my behaviors change, but also the situation around me changes. And so people are inherently complicated and inherently they're difficult to pin down. Okay. So everything's always changing on the person side. Everything's always changing on the environment side too. And so everything is difficult to identify, pin down, measure. You do the best you can, but it is about increasing your odds. There is no such thing as the perfect evaluation process. There's no such thing as a perfect situation or anything like that. Okay, so everything is inherently complex, and what we're trying to do is increase the odds of success, and we'll never get to 100%. But on the hiring manager side, especially, there is, you bring up a lot of ego involved. And I may have said this before, but everybody thinks that they're a great interviewer, and all of their cohorts and peers are terrible at it. That's like almost universal, the story that I hear. Oh yeah, people are bad interviewers. Well, except for me, I'm great. And it's like,
Oh,
no, you got
what
the first part right. You got the
what
second part wrong.
well, I'm having a brain fart, and I should be like go to PhD purgatory because of forgetting this. But what is the effect to where like 80% of the people that are there think they were above average type of thing? You know that kind of effect. Like, well, okay, well, not all of you can be above average just because of math doesn't work that way. Like, there's only like 90% of the people can't be above average because that kind of defeats the purpose of what average means.
Well, yeah, no, but I think in this case, it's just impossible for like an individual just to, I'm a good judge of talent. Well, you're only a good judge of talent if you're following a process. And
Yeah.
so it's not even good, bad, average. Because I remember talking to the folks who did this research years ago about interviews and the validity of interviews. And okay, what they found was unstructured interviews, which is the rule, not the exception, unstructured interviews where it's kind of a get to know you thing and you ask different questions to different people. They're not predictors of future performance. Structured interviews are, but even beyond that, and because I remember this having this discussion 25 years ago in grad school, and and then learning about this research, and it's like, okay, but are there good interviewers and bad interviewers? And so at the interviewer level, are you seeing variations in validity? And now we're sort of deep into the
Yeah.
research rabbit hole here. And and having real discussions with the researchers who are doing it is that yeah, we looked at that, and you're going to find natural variations, but what the natural variations they found looked like random variations. There weren't people who were just better at interviewing, unstructured interviewing than other people. The way to be a good interviewer and a good predictor of talent, a good evaluator of candidates, is to have a process and to follow that process and to do so, carefully and consistently, so you're comparing your candidates in a fair way. And so it's not just what is the way to get to a valid uh, uh, predictor of performance. It's what is the way to be fair to everybody, and that is to treat everybody consistently, to follow a process and to evaluate based on the same things. That's what you need to do, and every hiring manager needs to hear this. And almost no matter what the process is, it's you're not a good evaluator of talent unless you have a consistent process. And I keep saying this, stop hiring based on your gut feeling. And almost everybody says that they agree with that, except that their gut is the right. And it's like, no, no, no. You are also bad,
Yeah.
but you don't have to be bad.
Yeah.
you can follow a process. Let's talk about a process that you can use or that you can outsource to somebody else. But let's talk about a process that you can use to fairly evaluate candidates. And again, it's not just a validity accuracy question. It's a fairness question that it's not just a let's do it better. It becomes almost an ethical thing, and people don't
Yes.
even realize the extent that they're doing things wrong.
Well, it's funny, and we'll finish up and wrap up this segment, and then we'll jump into our next two questions in our third segment. But it's funny you mentioned about unstructured. Well, as soon as you started going down the unstructured interview, like everybody's an unstructured interview, the SHRM bells start going off, the HR compliance bells just start screaming, danger, 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 because
Right.
one, you think of the fairness end of it. I remember one particular interview process for a executive director for a nonprofit. The guy who was in charge of the quote hiring committee on the board knew everything. But now, granted, they had a quote unquote process. Then all of a sudden, he just started going off the reservation. He
Right.
started asking all these personal questions. Started to, like just stupid, like where do you go to church? It's like, oh,
Right.
what? I mean, just really went down a liability rabbit hole to where like someone could really push the issue, and you guys could be in a lot of trouble. Like this is not cool. Um, Last thing on unstructured, and I want to just general thoughts before we wrap up. Say you go through your process, right? And you've got apples and apples comparison.
Yep.
We've got a structured process. We ask the same three candidates, the same questions in the same way, same role play. Obviously, they're all going to turn out a little bit different. So we've got some objective data there. So we know what skills does the person have. They've gone through your role play. You understand, okay, all three of them would be good enough, right? All three of them would be good. What do you think as far as when I say unstructured interview, I'm almost like the team all goes out to dinner with all three of the same people
Right.
to kind of just, okay, beyond all three of them got the goods. How well do they just informally get along well with the team? And
Right.
like I said, I know it's not technically an unstructured interview, but to my thought for an unstructured interview is more that, like, get to know you. That might be of value in that type of context versus the substitute for the formal process just because my gut is that good.
Yeah. I think the get to know you stuff is important from uh, from a candidate's perspective. I would say don't use that in the hiring decision.
Mm.
So just because well, I guess two reasons. Because that is inherently going to be different from one person to the next. So it's I don't know what the evaluation is based on. And then two, from a compliance perspective, that raises all sorts of issues. And just because something, you know, is okay from a compliance doesn't mean that it's okay from a validity standpoint. But this really raises issues on both ends. Again, which is not to say that you shouldn't get to know them, but you shouldn't use that as your in the decision-making process.
Well, that makes sense because, like I said, my initial thought on it was more of the okay, I've got two equally qualified candidates, and either one of them would have been good.
Right.
So, as a team, say you got your senior leadership team, and you're going to add one more person to that, right? So, as a team, we do a get to know you, whether it's an interview, whether it's a let's go out to dinner, and the team kind of decides. Now, granted, there's nothing valid, reliable, or objective about it. I mean, I'm just saying well, what did you guys think about Joe versus Sally, right? Who do you guys seem to get
Right.
along with and mesh with better as a team? So it's a very, very subjective. Don't get me wrong, but
Yep.
that was kind of my thought on. Okay, I'm literally down to a coin flip, right? So what's better, flipping the coin or seeing who gets along better with my team and have the team kind of give their feedback, and even if it's just a contributing thing and not the final. But that was kind of where my mind was going with the get to know you stuff was okay, cultural fit with the team. Generally, hey, can everybody kind of play nice in the sandbox versus this person? When you got two, basically either of them would do great. I can't decide.
Right. So cultural fit, there are ways of evaluating that consistently. I want to make sure the things that are in the evaluation process are standard and consistent across people. So,
Perfect sense.
yeah. So, and don't make decisions just based on your gut. Collective guts across multiple people are marginally better than individual guts, but still, let's move away from this whole how did you feel about them? Because that is inherently, as you say, subjective and inherently just not reliable and valid.
No, like I said, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right or effective
Yeah.
or best practices.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, so with that, we'll wrap up our second segment here in Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We will be back in just a couple of minutes with our third and final segment and our last two questions. See you in a bit. Welcome back to Conversations on Leadership with Dr. Dave. We are here at our final segment with Dr. Mark Smith, and we're going to jump into our final two questions. So, Mark, what do you see as one of the biggest mistakes leaders make today?
Yeah, and I think it's building on what we have been talking about. So it's relying on their gut, and when they're making hiring
But
decisions.
Mark, their gut is right and everybody else's gut is wrong. Come on, give it the program. They're the best talent selectors on earth, right? And everybody
Well,
else is screwed up.
I know, and so it's beyond that even as the rule. So I've worked with other PhD level organizational psychologists, and they fall into the exact same trap. They're the ones saying that, oh yeah, I know we have this standardized process, but I'm a good evaluator talent. And then they get mad when you don't agree, and because they're right and everything else is wrong. So it's ego. Yeah, leaders are naturally going to have ego. They're naturally going to be confident, but it's probably misplaced confidence and it's overconfidence. Going back to what I said, is an inherently complicated process. People are always changing, situation are always changing, and then there's randomness that enters the equation that you just can't account for in any way. And so when leaders get overconfident about their ability to hire people just based on what they feel, that is such a mistake, and it's a battle that it's not just a battle that we fight constantly.
Right.
It's so predictable that from one company to the next, and you don't want to enter a new situation and so, okay, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that you're right and everybody else is wrong. And so I have to stop myself from like actively rolling my eyes when the thing comes up because it comes up all the time, consistently in a very predictable way. Leaders, especially, are overconfident in their ability to evaluate other people. They just are.
That's hilarious. And like I said, when you see the same thing come up in organization after organization after organization after 15, 20, 30 years, you realize, okay, I had the brightest bulb in the marquee, but I got a feeling the same set of circumstances, same things are probably likely to come up. And then when they do, like I said, just having to put the game face on, oh, here we
Right.
go again. It's like,
Right.
wow, really? I didn't realize that. Well, you're the best. Oh my goodness. We'll have to figure this one out. Let's see how that, yeah.
Right, right. And that, that's why you need the standard processes that you have in your back pocket that you can because what you can't say is stop. You can't simply say stop doing this. You have to say I have a better way
Right.
because people don't like to be told stop. And that's the whole thing that I went through with the book that I wrote last
Mm,
year about the skills first hiring. It's not just about stopping using education and years of experience as your main screening criteria,
right.
because what everybody's going to say in response to that is, you say stop, Mark. Well, how in the world am I supposed to know who's a good candidate and who's a bad candidate? And so it has to be, I have a better way. This is the better way. Use the better way. Stop using the ineffective way. And people are much more receptive when you say, I have a better way.
Right.
as opposed to simply stop what you're doing
Right.
because they're going to say, well, I'm doing this for a reason.
Right. Or what am I supposed to do instead is the first thing that comes up. Well,
Yeah.
and I think part of the, for lack of a better term, sales process on, hey, stop this, start that. It's kind of like you think of the old like eat this, not that kind of
Yeah.
thing, things that go, stop doing this and start doing that. A lot of it is, this is something we were talking about offline, is, is it illegal to have an unstructured interview process? No. But
Right.
like the minute whether it's hiring or promotion, the minute that somebody from a protected class feels that, oh, well, I didn't get this job or I didn't get this promotion or I didn't get the whatever, comma, because I'm in this protected class,
Right.
and it may be totally bogus. Okay. Let's give the interviewer the benefit of the doubt. Let's give the company the benefit of the doubt. Perfectly innocent, perfect, like, no, this guy was, or this gal was actually the most qualified person, whatever. But if they take it to court, how are you going to defend a, a non-systematic, unqualified, unstructured process? Right? How are you going to say no? It was legit because A, B, C, D, and E. Now, your better way is here's A, B, C, D, and E, and here's why, versus because that's how I've always done it. Your Honor, because I'm really good at picking people.
Yeah.
That's starting to sound expensive to me, man. I'm thinking like big checks getting written out. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, right, right, exactly. In any situation like that, there's the checks being written usually aren't as high as the risks to the company reputation.
Hmm.
And so, it wasn't that long ago, Walmart had a payout that they had to make based on something along these lines, and it was $1 million or something like that. And for a company like Walmart,
It's nothing.
yeah,
Round. That's a rounding error.
right. But it wasn't that. It was the headlines. It was the headlines of they lost this lawsuit and had to pay this fine. That was much worse than the fine itself. And companies have to consider that. Sometimes being sued or, whatever issues having to deal with from the EOC or the OFCCP, it's worse than the finding that they did something wrong. It's simply the accusation. And so stay away from even the accusation.
Yeah, because I mean, there's this thing called public record, and when people start looking you up and they realize, oh, you've been accused of this and you've been accused of that. Well, like I said, just because it's adjudicated is completely bogus. People are like, well, there's got to be some reason these people were making this accusation. I mean,
Right.
maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's a court of court of public opinion. Maybe it's the trial by social media. But either way, the reputational harm is, that's a good point. Reputational harm is a big deal.
Yep. 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 Though I'm much more concerned about that than any sort of monetary loss.
Yeah, and like I said, I think they both fall into the liability category, right? Whether you're getting
Yep.
hurt in the wallet or you're getting hurt in the reputation, which, let's say, the reputation is a deeper hurt than the other, it
Right.
still ends up being you can't defend the indefensible, and what you're doing is indefensible. So, yeah, yes, that's not the worst way to do it, but here's a better way, right?
Here's a
This
better way.
this way
Right.
you can actually defend in court. You can defend if there's an issue. You can justify this. And I'll be honest with you. From my perspective, and I'd love to hear yours. If I get a lawyer that comes to me and says, "Hey, you didn't promote Susie or John because they're in a protected class," right? And the lawyer is questioning you and threatening the suit, and they may just go ahead and file. But if you can say, "Hey, boom, 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 boom," or they go to file a suit and they talk to your legal team, and your legal team is like, it's solid, man. It is rock solid, airtight. At some point, they might be more, maybe I won't, file the accusation because they know there's no way to win.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right from a compliance perspective, but again, it's right from a validity perspective, from the best way of identifying the best candidates. The way to do it is a structured way.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And like I said, you always got to think about what happens if,
Yeah,
what happens if somebody complains? What happens if someone files a lawsuit? Plan for the worst case, right? And you
yep,
built this rock solid airtight process, or, well, as much as it can be. I mean, nothing's perfect. You mentioned that nothing is perfect. There's no perfect interview. There's no perfect process. But at least if you've done your due diligence and you've got a standardized process and you've got multiple layers, it's even like um, assessment tools they end up using for this is I like was more higher or mid level in the funnel. You know, there's very, 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 very few companies I know too that have actually gone through the EEOC OFFC process of you're doing the adverse impact or desperate impact studies,
Right.
have them, and even with that, both EEOC and OFFCP say if you're going to use these types of tools to be compliant with our processes, it has to be 1/3 of the hiring process or less, preferably less, right? But it can't be more than 1/3 at the most. So I mean, even then, it's still regular. There's a lot of hoops to jump through, and you still got to. It's a piece of what's going on. So to put something together that's compliant, the more steps you have, the better off you are. And I think, like I say, if you can build that airtight case, you have less chance of running into liability, and if whether it's reputational, payout, whatever.
Yep.
And like I said, I got a feeling that the person might still be as offended, but when they go to pay legal counsel, and that legal counsel is like, yeah, I work on a retainer basis. So like, or I work on a like I get paid if you get paid. And I'm telling you right now, their stuff is airtight. You're not gonna get paid, so I'm not representing you. Or hey, do you really want to drop 25 grand for my legal expenses just to drag those guys through the mud for a case you know you're not gonna win?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that's the issue there on the legal side. And but for the companies that I've worked with in the past, we've had very few issues legally. You've got candidate pushback and stuff, but that's different than legal issues.
Well, one thing, I mean, it really goes to the ounce of prevention kind of thing myself. I mean, if you set up a solid process that you're talking about, that, I mean, talk about not just a pound of cure, but a ton of cure. I mean, that ounce of prevention is going to keep you from ever having those issues. And you'll never deal with that if you have that solid process that you've outlined right from the beginning. You've got something
Right.
that's defensible. You don't have to worry about it going awry because you set this up from the beginning correctly. A lot less chances of that ever happening. So it won't even be an issue. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of the companies that you worked with haven't had that issue because they set up the structures in advance to have those valid, reliable, structured interview processes to where they're very defendable. And then if something's like that, there's less chance of somebody, no matter how aggrieved they may be because they didn't get the promotion, probably less chance of doing it when well, it was a pretty solid process. And
Right.
I really don't have the discretionary money just to blow because I'm pissed off.
Right. 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 Yep.
Blow a year's salary on a 10% raise because I didn't get this on a promotion. Yeah, probably not likely going to happen.
Yeah. And if it did, it would be a silly decision. So.
Exactly, exactly. So how about this? What do you think is the best way leaders can improve their leadership skills?
Yeah. So I mean, we can go back to some of the things that we have been talking about. So from an improving leadership skills perspective, the role play exercises actually work very well.
Mm,
I've often said for leadership development, what uh, what is often needed is what I would refer to as a safe place to fail.
yes,
Uh, so, because people learn through experiences, and but they're not any good before they have those experiences. And so how can you have the experiences before you're any good at them? Well, that's a problem. So what is going to happen is you're gonna get a lot of failures in there. So how can you set up a safe place for people to fail and therefore to learn?
very true.
And for me, you can have these rotational sort of things, but I still, if it's got real world consequences, I don't want to set people up to fail. But if it's a sort of a fake assessment sort of situation where it's realistic, it's work related, well, let's see how they would react. And sometimes people react great, and okay, they're very skilled at this, they have this competency. And sometimes they don't react well, and they're, oh, okay, I know that this person needs to work on their in-time decision making. They need to work on, okay, how am I going to make decisions quickly, under pressure, do so effectively and do so, with justification and confidence.
Well, it's funny you said that because the first thing I thought about, there's two things that come to my mind when you said that, having a safe place to practice. And the first one, I'll kind of go bigger to smaller. The first one I thought about was Toastmasters.
Yep.
When you talk about public speaking, presentation
Yep.
skills, learn how to speak on the fly, you can't get a better spot to improve that skill than going to a safe place like Toastmasters, being involved in a Toastmasters club, and realizing, hey, if I give this presentation to the board of directors, or I give this sales presentation to a company and I blow it, I'm screwed. Where I can practice different pieces of it here, hone it, get it toned in, get feedback, improve this. And then when I do it, like I said, there's no consequences. That's what I
Right.
love about it. And everybody's there in that same kind of supportive environment. The other thing that more micro into an organization, I was just listening this past weekend over the holidays to Alex Ramosi, big fan. And he wrote a couple books, $100 million offers and $100 million leads. And I love kind of the way he thinks about like the sales process and that type of thing. He was talking about how he hires and structures and builds sales teams. And to exactly your point, his biggest thing is like 5 days a week for an hour every day, especially when they're new, role play, role play, role play, role
Yep.
play for sales. And when you bring people in, say you're working on one specific thing, whether it's as a group or whether it's an individual or whatever. He was talking about it, almost as a group, right? Take an hour, you get a whole sales team, everybody practices for whatever on a certain objection or a certain close or a certain
Yep.
whatever, okay, a brush off or whatever. And they practice it. Great, do it again. Okay, hey, tweak this little thing, try it one more time. Perfect, you nailed it. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. And so they build that repetition. And it's funny, it's not beyond the realm of comprehension. Actually, it's more in the wow, this is truly the best practices when you talk about role playing for in a sales team. But how many times do we do that to develop our leaders?
Yep. Yep. I mean, who does that well is the military.
Oh well, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great at it. I mean, even in the fire service, we trained and we trained and we trained different
Yep.
scenario based whatever. We get out there and flow some water. We do different training and skills. But to think of I'm not breaking out a lot of equipment. I'm not doing a lot of this, but just role playing real life things, just like you would in an interview, to use that for leadership development. Okay, I need to train
Yep.
these people to take this position, whether it's succession planning or just leadership development in general. I really think sales teams, unfortunately, and I'm not saying bad on the sales team, I'm saying bad on everybody else. Sales teams have it in spades over top of most leadership development programs in big organizations because, yeah, they'll send you to a class or you do this or that, whatever, but they don't really role play the scenarios and
Right.
the situations that you're going to be involved with. And being a frontline supervisor, role playing, oh my God, my person brought me in, I'm having to deal with the customer. I got to deal with certain situations for the initial promotion to frontline supervisor are different than the situations for the manager, the
Yep.
director, the VP. And I think that the sales organizations for larger companies I think they beat us to the punch and they've really got an idea about, well, if you want to get good at X, you have to have the experience in doing X. And the only way to do that in a safe, non threatening, we're not going to lose our shirt environment is role play.
Yeah, yeah. And when I, you know, go through the role plays with folks, a lot of times it's the soft skills. So it's not necessarily the specifics of like the overcoming objections, like the specific objections that we're looking to overcome, but it's like the person and how they are sort of in the moment. So not the skills from a hard skills perspective,
Right.
but from a soft skills perspective, and then a little different how I will do it versus in a training context is I'm looking to identify strengths and weaknesses as opposed to just develop, develop, develop.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the process has to be any different.
No, I think from a development standpoint, and you really nailed it earlier when you were talking about, hey, this is something, yes, used a lot for candidate selection and hiring and succession planning, but this is something that really should be used in leadership development overall in general. To how do you practice, you give people projects that aren't going to and leadership positions and tasks and projects that aren't going to bankrupt the company, right?
Right.
How do you do different things? How do you train people to do this? You put them in the experience. Well, how do you do that without worrying about lawsuits and hurt
Right.
feelings and stuff like that? You train the skill. Like I said, it
Yeah.
could be a hard skill, it could be a soft skill, and even both could be looked at. Yes, I'm trying to achieve a certain objective in both. How are you going to, you got an employee that's having a meltdown. How are you going to talk them off the ledge, right? You're
Yep.
having this certain situation with the customer. How are you going to talk them off the ledge? You're going to, whatever the skill is, it might be, yeah, it's different than, all right, I'm going to overcome this brush off or objection or this particular pushback. A little bit different, but you're still using, how do I communicate? How do I influence? How do I, my tonality, my body language, how do I use these things to best achieve whatever the objective is? Hard skill, soft skill, somewhere in between. I think it's the same process, just doing it in a different manner. But I love the idea of taking what you use for succession planning, promotions, candidate selection, and say, well, how can we use that and the best practices that they're already using that in a sales context to get people the experience they need to
Yep.
get better to do the job? How do we get people to get better to do the job and be equipped as a leader when they get promoted? Which, as well as I do, most of the time they put the best salesperson in as a sales manager, and it's two
Yep.
different skill sets, and
Yep.
they fail. So we don't prepare them. Well, how many other leaders do we put in positions that they're the best technical whatever, and we don't prepare them for that leadership role? And unfortunately, we're setting them up to fail.
Yep. No, as a company, we can't do that. We can't set our people up for failure. But from a development training perspective, training classes, I'm not, and I will say this broadly, aren't going to get the people the skills, right? It's
No,
the practice and the experience. That's what develops the skills. The classes don't. The classes that may provide some sort of baseline, but that doesn't give you the skills. It's the practice and the experience. So where do people get the practice experience without, completely screwing things up? And so
right. Well, and it's funny you mentioned that because there's so many industries that do that. You said exactly what I was going to say. The classes are the baseline. I've got to
yeah,
have some baseline level of knowledge and what I should be doing before I can put the skills in. Right? I can't. They're never going to send you into a burn building, a training fire, with a live fire exercise if you haven't been through all the classes. And then the classes are what gets you to, let me get out there and put all the pieces of the equipment together in flow water, put all the pieces of the puzzle together individually, culminating in, okay, well, now let's actually go do this in a safe space, whether it's fire department, whether it's EMS, whether it's whatever. Cool. Let me take the class on starting IVs. Then, hey, there's a little rubber arm. I get to practice this a bunch of
right.
times. Then let me go to a hospital and as an intern, and practice doing it. So there's so many, with somebody standing over there coaching me and watching me through this, long before I ever, do one of these on my own. You know what I mean? So there, like a lot of other industries have that model set up for the classroom training being just the prerequisite knowledge you need before we start skill building on top of it. I just think it's funny how when we look at it from a leadership development standpoint, we don't take those same things that work in these other industries in these other contexts and apply the same thing to leadership development.
Yeah, we know how to do it.
And yeah,
And so, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
it's not recreating the wheel, but yeah, you're right. I challenge industries to start doing that, start
Yeah.
looking at more. Although it costs money, it's expensive, and it's a pain in the butt.
Well, yeah, and so I'm more focused on construction companies these days and helping them. And because I can now have a standard set of tools that don't have to be developed from scratch, and I've used before, and so by having those things ready, industry focused, I can do it cheaper than, oh, can you help me develop my own process? Well, I can, but it'll be expensive. So that's one way to keep prices down, and to keep the headaches down. So we're better at this than we used to be. So again, I've been doing this type of thing in some different contexts for a number of years, and we're cheaper, we're better than we ever used to be.
And like you said, technology has a lot to do with that. And it's funny you mentioned about niching down to a certain industry, productized services. Like I said, I don't have
Yeah,
to recreate the wheel every single time. Yeah. If you're willing to spend the money, can I come into a, venture capital CPA firm? Can I come into this other industry and do it? Yeah, I can. It's going to cost you more.
right,
But can I take something that's specifically made for construction and easily adapt that to quote the trades? Oh yeah, just literally swap out one title for another because it's so focused in the same direction. I said
right,
a general contractor, they're all in home, they're all in construction. This guy just does electrical. This guy does HVAC. This guy
right,
does plumbing. This guy's the general. So I mean, they're all this guy's the carpenter, but it's so easily close enough to industry to be able to just
right.
plug and play versus wow, I got to do something over here that's in investment banking. Nah, it's hard to take this construction
Well,
scenario.
I mean, you say that, but when I'm looking for, leadership type of skills, yeah, the leadership skills in a construction company versus a software company, the underlying skills are different. Now, the people are different.
Right.
The specifics of the situation are different, but I'm looking for communication, adaptability,
Yep.
decision making in the moment. I'm still looking for decision making, adaptability, decision making in the moment.
Just
Whether
different
I'm,
scenarios.
yeah, right, right.
But
But regardless, working for a specific industry, you can have these exercises that are very tailored, and the tailoring, it makes it, I think, more palatable for candidates. The candidates go into it and they go, "Oh, this looks familiar. Oh, I get this. Oh, yeah, I get this." As opposed to if they had an assessment based on a different industry, they would be, I think, react to it different. So,
no,
it,
that's a
it
good point because I think I was thinking of it initially as far as from the company standpoint, from what they're using it. Like I said, you're assessing for the exact same leadership quality, trait, skill, whatever. But from the candidate perspective,
yep,
why are you giving me this scenario? This doesn't
yeah,
relate to my job. This is bullcrap. What does this have to do with everything? So they're not accepting of it and they're really dismissive from the beginning
right,
versus, yeah, that sounds exactly like what something that I would deal with or maybe have dealt with in the past, or I've been on the other end of it with a manager or supervisor or VP. So yeah, that scenario resonates with me so I can buy into it a little bit more and get into the role play.
yeah. Right. We can't discount the responses of the candidates in these situations. So
Nope.
I think personally I could have a software company exercise that would be perfectly valid in all sorts of industries, but that's different than the candidate responses. The candidate responses, especially software versus construction, those are fairly different ends of the pole. I think I'd get a much more pushback. I don't want pushback.
No. Well, like I said, they see it as being legit and they see it as being, wow, this is something that, that I can relate with, and this resonates with me. I'm more likely to get into it and really jump in and give it my best and actually do something with it versus this is just a bunch of crap. Why are we doing this? This
Yeah.
is ridiculous. This doesn't relate to me at all. I don't see how this is how this is useful for my job, my skills, my whatever. Like this is yeah, and they write it off as bunk versus
Yep.
the same exact skill set that you're assessing for. Context is wrong. They don't buy into it.
Yep. That's right. And that's what makes it make sense to specialize in an industry.
Yeah, no, I love that, and it's like I said, easy because you're not recreating the wheel anymore. You got a list of scenarios you can pull from, and
Yep.
like I said, much more relative for the candidate. But as we wrap up, tell some final thoughts, and tell the listeners like how they connect with you, your company, your book, LinkedIn, website, whatever.
Right.
Like if they're like, hey man, I really want to learn more about this whole thing from Mark. Like how would they make that happen?
Yeah. So I'm posting regularly on LinkedIn. And so Dave, I know you'll have my the link to my to LinkedIn profile
Yeah.
Um,
It'll be in the description, like link to the book, that kind of stuff,
yeah,
website.
it gets a little tricky when your last name is Smith. Um, there are a lot of Mark Smiths in
Well, the only thing you can
LinkedIn.
be
There,
thankful of is it's not John Smith.
yeah, well, right, exactly.
There's a
But
few more John Smiths than Mark Smiths, but not many.
I've made it a point to, be connected with a bunch of other Mark Smiths on LinkedIn, just so it can look like Mark Smith has liked his own link or article or whatever. Yeah, so there's that, and then uh, you can go to my website, abetterchoicehire.com, and the book is called A Better Choice: The Manager's Guide to Skills First Hiring. That's right. It's got a nice blue color that my kids approved of, so that's good.
So at least you know what you're looking like when you're what you're looking for when you're looking on Amazon.
That's right. That's right. And then another thing that I've done just recently is developed some structured interview, not just questions, but a whole structured interview guides
Mm.
for project managers in construction, for construction directors, sometimes they're called superintendents,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and also for estimators. They're structured interview guides that I can provide to folks for free that are standard questions based on good competencies for these roles. But it's easy these days to find questions. So it's these questions with standard follow-up questions,
Right.
but the trickiest part is uh, a standard process for scoring the responses. And so these are
Mm.
the scoring matrices for each of these competencies. And so what does a good answer versus an average answer versus a bad answer look like? And if you follow the structured interview process, you'll be able to have very consistent interviews and evaluations, and that's going to increase the validity of the whole process. And so, again, it's more than just the same questions; it's the same process and the same way of evaluating the answers, and that's what I'll provide. And so, in the website, there's a link there that you can fill in some information. I'll send those.
Cool. I said, or nothing else, they can reach out to you on LinkedIn and get access to the same information. I like the idea of having a standardized rubric that you're using to judge the responses because the same questions to everybody is great, but who did great versus who did
Right.
average versus who sucked is could be very subjective, even for the same questions.
Well, and these days you can just plug into ChatGPT. I'm hiring for an estimator role. What questions should I ask? And they'll create questions that sort of sound good, and then you use them, and then people respond in different ways, and then you go, "What the heck am I supposed to do now?" And follow the process. I think that's been a theme here. Use a
Yes.
structure, use a process, but at the end of the process, there's a consistent way of evaluating the responses.
I think that's the key. That was the linchpin in all of it is having that consistent evaluation process, that rubric at the end to know how do I evaluate the answers that they're giving me. Same thing,
Yep.
legally defensible, but like I said, I know that I'm following the process and I'm actually going to get a good hire. It's something that's going to move the needle on. Is this going to be a better predictor of this person's performance long term versus wow, I like the guy. He was nice, and we went to the
Right.
same school, and he had the right education and experience. And 6 months
Right.
later, he sucks. And now I'm hiring for another person, and that gets expensive. We talked about writing checks for liability, bad hires, and whatever. I think companies, and correct me if I'm wrong as we wrap this thing up, but I think companies spend 100-fold, maybe 1,000-fold more in cost of turnover for bad hires than they ever do in lawsuits and judgments and stuff like that for people taking them to court for discriminatory hiring or whatever.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Yeah.
And the bad part about it, and this is, I've had a lot of conversations with CEOs, whether it's the cost of disengaged employees or the cost of turnover, which to me are like the top two evils in an organization that are hidden costs. The biggest thing is your CFO is not going to give you your cost of turnover on a P&L or a balance sheet. It's not going to happen. It's not a line item, right? Well, how
Right.
much is our turnover costing us this quarter?
Right.
You can determine it, but it's not a standard gap accounting type of thing,
Well, and there's more to be factored in than just the direct cost. The indirect
Correct.
cost of those is much more than the direct cost. Like
Oh my God, yes.
I had to pay an executive search firm, $30,000 to fill this. Yeah, but that's a minority of the cost involved.
Well, it's funny, and maybe squirrel moment here, but I got a friend of mine who is I'll have to introduce you to, but he is a master of this, what you just said,
Right.
figuring out cost of turnover for frontline positions.
Mm.
Right. That's his thing. He worked with the call center I referred him to, and he realized, and they were having crazy churn. And he went through everything, right? How much does it cost for your ads? How much it cost for the time per hour for your people to go through the ads and do the searches and
Yeah.
candidates? Now you got to call them on the phone. Now you got to interview them. Now you hire them, and how much it onboarding? Like, okay, well now you got to pay them their full time salary, and they're in training for 2 or 3 weeks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Obviously not productive. And then where's that kind of almost like a supply demand curve? Where's the point where they start getting better and better at their job to get to the point where they're actually crossing that threshold of we're getting out of them the exact same amount that we're investing into them, and then eventually they have to cross that and hey, we're getting a higher
Right.
yield from them that we're putting into them, but it takes a while, 6, 12, 18 months
Yep.
sometimes, depending on the position, before they cross that threshold. Well, he figured out, and it was like a $12 an hour call center job, but they were paying true costs, hidden and unhidden costs, like part of whatever. And the company agreed once he delved the logic, because all the information came with him, $18,000 per $12 an hour call center job person every time they were turning over, and they were turning them over like it was going out of style. And
Right.
so, like I said, it wasn't just direct costs. So, like I say, executive search firm, recruiting firms, whatever. It's a direct and indirect, and that, like I said, that's not going to be on a P&L statement. But if you do calculate it properly and figure all the costs involved, it is staggering.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I've run some of those analysis myself, and sometimes we refer to them as utility analysis or something like that. And often the numbers are so high that they're like unbelievable, and then you have to dial it back a bit. No one will believe that.
But you know what? It's probably more accurate than people want to believe.
Yeah, right.
And the bad part is that money's already been spent. That's
Yep.
old money. I mean, that money's
Right.
already out the door. It's just waste, and it's and then it
Yep.
just goes back to revenue, productivity, and profits
Yep.
at that point. So yeah, those things cost companies millions of dollars, and the problem is they're very hidden, and it can be easily, well, I'll say easily, but more easily remedied following a process. Like I said, heard that once or twice. Following
Yep.
a process, being consistent, having a good way to do this, getting the right people on the team, and being able to hire in the people you need to really be successful. So, with that, any final thoughts, Mark?
I think you hit my main points there.
Perfect, perfect,
That's
perfect.
right.
Well, with that, like I said, we'll have all the links in the description below. Thank you guys for joining us on conversations on leadership with Dr. Dave, with Dr. Mark Smith, and we will see you guys next time. And thanks for joining us for the first episode of 2025.